Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Doctors Neal Hebert and Jon Cogburn. Dr. Hebert is Assistant Professor of Theatre in the Department of Visual and Performing Arts at Grambling State University, and Dr. Cogburn is Professor of Philosophy and Department Chair in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Louisiana State University. And today we're going to talk about their book, Kayfabe Nation, Professional Wrestling, Donald Trump, and the New Cynicism. So Dr. Hebert, Dr. Cogburn, welcome to the show. It's a huge pleasure to everyone. Oh, there it is.
Book, Kayfabe Nation, in reverse, sadly, but...
By the way, is that Steve Austin on the cover?
Yes.
Or... Oh, okay. Okay.
And we did not come up with that idea. Actually, the press just gave us that. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait, that's Steve Austin.
Yeah, I would have thought
13,
I didn't think we could get him, so I'm happy about that.
So they must have found a photo that the rights were available to. But yeah, that's definitely Stone Cold Steve Austin on the cover. So that's
that's awesome. I mean, every wrestling fan, I mean, it will catch their attention for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me start by asking you, how did you come up with this idea of making a connection between WWE and particularly WWE from the Attitude Era and Donald Trump?
So actually, John and I have been talking about these ideas since 2003. There's in the introduction or the preface to our book, we talk about a smoky apartment on Chime Street with where someone asked, have y'all ever seen a tape of Japanese pro wrestling? That was me when I was in the MA program at LSU in philosophy, and I had John and our deceased friend Ian Crystal had come over one day after class just because my apartment was right off campus. So students and grad students and professors would just drop by whenever they'd get bored for that period of time. So we started talking about that when I got John into Japanese and Mexican professional wrestling. And then we sort of incorporated into our weekly watching of wrestling. So we started in 2003. I had been watching for 10 years at that point, since 1993. My dad was a huge boxing fan, and I found boxing kind of boring because they only punched, right? Like I was young, I didn't understand the nuances of boxing. So one day I saw wrestling and my dad's like, that's fake. So of course I wanted to watch it because my dad said it was fake. I was like, well, it's probably good then if it's fake because they can control what happens. And I was indeed right. So I wanted to get my first pay-per-view, which was SummerSlam 1993 with Lex Luger on the Lex Express versus Yokozuna. And my mom decided she was going to watch wrestling. And if she liked it, I could get the pay-per-view. And the first time she ever watched, she watched Monday Night Raw. The main event was Money Incorporated versus the Steiner brothers in a cage match. And the only detail I remember is that the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, got his trunks pulled down and he was wearing a thong. And my mom thought he had a nice butt. So she decided because of that, I could watch wrestling and get the pay-per-view. And that's kind of the origin story of me as a pro wrestling fan. That's how John got into it. And, you know, we just have been watching throughout all that time. Like I would, there's another thing in our book called that where we thank the true wrestling fans. And that's a text thread that we've maintained for 10, 15 years of just all people that talk about wrestling that were in our friend group. And we still have it going to this day. So, you know, I was in a philosophy program with John. And then when I got my PhD in theater history, I wanted to be a classicist. I wanted to focus on Greek tragedy. And my entire committee at my first year review sat me down and said, no. They're like, you're going to write about wrestling because you like that. And we think it's very marketable. So John was on my committee as an outside reader. And I produced a book that kind of combined performance studies with my fandom and turned that into my dissertation, which was called Professional Wrestling, Local Performance Practice, or Local Performance History, Global Performance Practice. It's been a while. And, you know, I decided not to fully book that. And just because I don't know why. I didn't feel like booking that just yet. And John and I started co-writing something around the same time when I was in grad school. So we started writing what became the book in 2012. Does that sound right?
I think 2011 we presented at ASTR in Dallas. That was the first
Actually,
time.
wait, I was directing How I Learned to Drive when that happened. So I think that was fall 2013.
Okay.
When we went to Dallas. And so that was the first version. We let it sit for a couple years. We had actually got it admitted. We'd gotten the paper we wrote accepted for a pro wrestling anthology that we eventually quote in what would become our book. But because we were doing mostly philosophy at that time,
I forgot that. Oh, that sucked.
Wanted a radical revision. And I was in the process of trying to finish my dissertation while being a full-time high school teacher. So I just couldn't get that level of notes done. John was also committed to another project. So we pulled that paper and then we resubmitted it once I got, once I was working for a charter school. I sold out and made a lot more money in the alternative American education system, which for any Americans that are watching it, that charter schools pay more, but they're also, ethically suspect. But I had the money to do another conference. So, and that year, the American Society of Theater Research's conference was in New Orleans. So John and I just drove down to New Orleans and presented it as part of a working group convened by Shannon Walsh, who is a professor at LSU on performance and sport. And it just so happens that there was a member of the, was it Vanderbilt Press, had scoured our program notes, like all of the papers, and he cold emailed us and said, I want to hear about your paper and possibly turn it into a book. So he quit the press, though. So our book was orphaned at Vanderbilt, and we rewrote it a couple times. And in the end, we decided to walk away from Vanderbilt just because they wanted the book to become something that I felt there was already a competitor on the market for. They wanted more of a history of pro wrestling.
What's interesting, Neal, is that first, Neal, if you become a supervillain, everyone has your backstory now. So
yeah.
So I'll give a little bit of my backstory. I started watching wrestling and. When I was a kid, I sort of barely remember it because it was on local access in Montgomery, Alabama. And we absolutely believed they were real. But at one point, two of the wrestlers, Neal and I figured out who these were at one point. We saw them in a car together and they were like enemies. They broke kayfabe. And that caused this is so embarrassing. I was in high school and still believed it was the outcomes were not in 1986 in Montgomery, Alabama. Kind of like a Danny McBride reality. And so that was, and then with Neal, I rekindled my love of it. But the interesting thing that Neal just said is this is a broader point in academia. It's actually, people encourage interdisciplinary work, but it's very hard to do because most presses, they have an editor that maintains a list. And the list isn't just in terms of philosophy or performance studies. It'll be one area of philosophy, just analytic philosophy of mind or just continental political philosophy. It's so trying to I forgot that happened to us with the first paper in 2014 or whatever, where we were told that first paper is made a really interesting philosophical point that Neal and I discovered that there are two separate ontologies of wrestling. So an ontology, among other things, tells you the identity conditions of things. So if you're a wrestling fan, you talk about one of the key terms is the match. And Neal was doing aesthetics and philosophy, and we put this together. The match is sometimes a performance kind and sometimes a particular performance. And these are different types of artwork. So a musical work can be multiply instantiated, but the performance itself isn't. It's a singular spread out over space-time vaguely.
Right.
Well, in wrestling, in the storyline, the match is a performance. But outside of the storyline, if you're talking about the industry, it's a performance kind because you practice the match, if it's WWE, in a dark show before you perform it.
And for people that don't remember, the back in the day, the way it would work is in the build up to a pay-per-view, they would have most of the matches that were going to be at the pay-per-view rehearsing spots on house shows. So if that SummerSlam, you were going to see The Undertaker and Kurt Angle, there's a strong chance in the 3 weeks building up to that pay-per-view, if you go to a house show, you would see a Kurt Angle versus Undertaker match, but it would not be the match from the pay-per-view. It would.
Can you talk about before WWE? How, because I didn't know this before you. This is.
Okay. So this is a point in the book.
It's amazing to me that this is a cool one.
So if you look at Mick Foley's book, he talks about this. So that's where I got this idea from. That's Have a Nice Day, his first autobiography, is that in certain territories where you went from town to town, you might lose your title or lose a big grudge match 5 nights in a row, and each city thinks they got the match. So Mick Foley tells a story about how he had to break the news to some of his close friends in, I think it was Tennessee or Texas, that he had to leave after he lost the Loser Leaves Town match. And one of the friends was like, Mick, we went to a nearby town 3 days ago and we saw the match. We already knew you were losing. So that would happen with like in Mid-South and Ric Flair, because in Mid-South, which is what I wrote my dissertation on using Louisiana history, I was the historian who found a way to get a PhD in history by talking about 9 years. It's very elegant bit of work on my part. But what would happen is in Mid-South, they would do different tapes. The tapes would have to be bicycled out, is what they called it. So one town would get 1 week of television, while another town over would be a week ahead of that. Then another town would be 2 weeks ahead. So they had to keep track of which episode of TV was airing in each area. So when they did their local shows, they would deliver the right matches. And you could see in each town thought they were getting the match, even though, in every city they've seen Ric Flair lose his US championship for the last week, and everyone would be convinced that was the match, because they were, each time within the logic of kayfabe, that was the match you saw. The live match in your town was the real match. But if you actually know the backstory, you know that, hey, he's lost this title 5 times, like first in Charlottesville, then in this town, then in this town, then in this town. And, keep going.
Yeah, we'd written up a paper on like the ontology and metaphysics of wrestling that nobody much wanted to publish. And we're like, okay, Neal, finish your dissertation, get a job, and we'll, do your more historiography stuff. Then we'll come back to it. But then like 2015 happens and Trump comes out and starts giving these, and we kind of got obsessed with Trump's speeches because we view them as wrestling promos.
They're totally wrestling promos.
That became the discussion that led to the actual book, which we're able to. And so prior to Trump, we had started to think about neokayfabe. There's the first broad usage of that is Josie Reisman. Her book, The Ringmaster, but a few years ago, a paper.
I want to say online. We used it in 2015 or 2016. So
yeah, it was on the web elsewhere.
It's convergent evolution, right? Like she evolved eyes, we evolved eyes.
So we had like try to make this quick. We had like, we realized that like when we were doing our metaphysics, we had an aesthetic point, a philosophy of art point, that the idea of like aesthetic distance becomes much more interesting and with neokayfabe. So we have an architect that we have fan types. So the first one is just the fan, or no, the Southern fan.
Yeah.
And I was the Southern fan until like maybe 1986, I started to doubt. But you still will go to a BW3, and sometimes it's so lovely when this happened. A guy comes up to you and says like, so when CM Punk was like shaving people's heads and they joined the straight edge army,
2011,
I would run into people like smoking cigarettes saying like, I can't do a Southern accent. Can you do it?
The guy was like, let me tell you something about CM Punk. If he tries to take me out the audience in front of my kids, that's not going to happen. Like this dude believed. And it was awesome because when you're in a show like that, it's fun to be around people who believe.
Yeah.
But so the last time I saw local pro wrestling, by the way, the local promotion up here is called Bayou Independent Wrestling. I was cheering for a bad guy because in Baton Rouge is independent wrestling, which John and I went to. He was their big good guy, the Cajun strong style, something like that. So I was cheering him because I'd seen him before, and a child ran up to me and punched me in back the head because I was cheering for a bad guy, and his mom was mortified. I was like, I'm so sorry. And I was like, look, he's please, your child's like 3. It didn't hurt. It's kind of funny, but
we've seen some like
people like that is so much fun.
We've seen some moms that are like going to punch you in the head too, though.
Yeah, right. When the adults believe too, oh, it's so great.
It's so happy. Yeah. But so that's the fan. That's the Southern fan. But then there's the fan, and this isn't that different from like a movie. You have some aesthetic distance, but you sort of like what's it called? The suppression of what's the
suspension of disbelief? Suspension of disbelief.
You suspend disbelief, and that's the way it works in art. But before that, you have the critic, and we named this eternal critic after our friend Ian Crystal, because when we watched with him, he'd always just say that's so fake.
That's so fake.
When he was a kid, he used to go to the Montreal Superdome with his father, or whatever the Norma Dorm's called in Montreal, and watch Jean Ferret, Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
And so Ian still loved Andre the Giant, but he wasn't big on wrestling. So the eternal critic is like, just that's fake, that's fake. Okay, you could do that with a movie. Like, real pirates didn't do that, but you're kind of missing the point.
Yeah, Pirates of the Caribbean is not accurate.
Yeah. Then you got the fan who distances. But what we discovered, and this is what we started thinking about neokayfabe, is to understand the storylines in wrestling now, you have to simultaneously trace the supposed real world. Because when the real world and the story curated around the real world, because it's not so real after all, becomes more compelling, they will inconsistently change the storylines to bring the real world in. And the only way the fan has to do a lot of cognitive damage to themselves, for the Southern fan to keep going, because it'll just be inconsistent. We can talk about examples of this as we go along. But then so we started to see Trump not just kayfabe, but we'll talk about this later. I think we should move on from this is the origin story, but neokayfabe too. So that's sort of how the book came about.
It's funny because back in 2016 during just before the elections, I had a friend who was really far left, and he really opposed U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East. And he was like, oh my God, I hate Hillary Clinton because she's going to do the same things that the previous presidents were already doing, Obama and Bush and so on. So I prefer that Trump wins, and I think he's not going to do the same. And I was like, hey, take it easy, because
you know what a wrestling promo is.
Go back to 2007 and watch Donald Trump's promos up till WrestleMania 23, and perhaps you will know, or you will learn what I'm talking about, because he's getting a promo there. Come on.
Yeah, it's I don't know. 2016 was when a lot of people got radicalized I know. But, we also have to talk about this, and we'll talk about it later, is the role in which the Democratic Party played in the rise of Trump. The Hillary Clinton campaign, they pushed him to win. They were like, oh, we're going to destroy him. And it's like, I don't know. You kind of set us up for this. I think little Marco and the others would have probably been much easier to beat than an anti-establishment figure against, the embodiment of democratic liberalism.
Well, this gets to sort of the key behind a lot of the book, because there's two incompatible stories you could tell about Trump, and we think they go through with kayfabe and neokayfabe. So one thing he did that was really worked, he and Bernie. There are a few things that most American voters suspected or believed that no one would say on those debate stages.
Right.
The two biggest things, and I have to be really clear, if you watch the 2015 debates, Trump ran as economically populist, economically left-wing, but socially conservative. Most Americans tend to be slightly economically left-wing and slightly socially conservative, but whenever the party system offers up a moderate third way, they reverse those polarities. So moderates are always presented as running against the two parties, but the moderate is always what people hate about both parties, because they end up being very libertarian socially and very conservative economically. Anyway, so Trump, he railed against the American foreign policy and the forever wars with the war on terror. As LEG says, the war of terror. It's Borat that says the war of terror. He ran against that. He ran against Obamacare, but he didn't run against it from a libertarian perspective. He was going to provide much better health care. He ran against offshoring jobs. And it was only I remember watchers, there was late in the campaign where he called Bernie a socialist to differentiate himself from Bernie. And that actually surprised a lot of people, because his economic policies up to that point have been determinant for Bernie. So one theory of Trump is that he actually was hitting the sweet spot of American politics at the time, which neither the parties nor the third way people do. And that he got superpowers, that people thought he was honest because he said a few important truths that people believed, so they went along with them. Neal and I thought that, and that's why we thought this guy might actually win once Bernie was out of the,
I mean, everyone.
We don't bet on our academic expertise, so we've never won any bets on these. But
yeah, that's the thing. I remember everyone I talked to that knew politics was like, oh, well, yeah, if Clinton runs, she's losing. People were like, Bernie will probably lose too, but he's got a better shot, was what a lot of the people I know. People got very angry with me too when we would say things like that. But scholars in political science get very angry with me when I said that. Yeah, it's like, I'm sorry.
When the other thing that Trump did that's more wrestling centric and fits wrestling better is the core truth he told that Bernie didn't, is that this is all fake. Why do you give all, this is a really famous line, you gave money to Hillary, why did I give her money? Because she does what I said. I
give money to everybody is what he said.
That it's phony, and that is neokayfabe right there. And then how does Trump stay possible? He didn't do any of the economic populist stuff that he said he was going to do. Why do these people still? Why does he have a third of the country still supports him? We go into this in the book. Biden did much more of the things Trump said he was going to do, for better and worse. Probably was a terrible idea to maintain the tariffs against China during a period of high inflation.
Yeah,
that probably cost him but things with restoring manufacturing, I don't know if you remember, Trump had manufacturing week every week, and it never came to pass. So how can he not do any of that stuff? What's really going on here? And that's where I think the lens of neokayfabe. This is all a joke. It's all fake. You're in on the con with me because we both see that it's fake.
Yeah.
What's left of politics at that time? I can make people you hate really miserable. And that's wrestling. It's
you watch the heel you watch the people you dislike get humiliated. Their pants get pulled down in the cage, just like my mom saw, and people are happy. So
Trump is great at owning the libs.
If
liberals
that might be the only thing.
We're getting way ahead of ourselves. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
No. Yeah. I was going to say. But how old is the connection between Donald Trump and professional wrestling? Because I was born in 1990 and I only started watching wrestling in 2006. So everything that came before that, I watched most of it from the WWE/WWF mainly, but it was after the fact. So I remember, for example, that I hope I'm getting the facts right here, but I think that WrestleMania 4 and WrestleMania 5 were held at Trump Plaza, right?
So actually, WrestleMania 4 was billed as being held at Trump Plaza.
1988.
88, but it was actually held in the Atlantic City Convention Center. But they said it was Trump Plaza.
So that was too.
Trump will appear on WWE programming throughout the 2000s, but when he really gets involved was the 2007 Battle of the Billionaires, when he and Vince put their. For people that aren't familiar with this, which I'm assuming will be a lot of people because we all watch wrestling, but I'm assuming you, the viewer, are probably here for the philosophy content. What happened was there was a match, and Vince McMahon chose a wrestler to be his proxy, and Donald Trump chose a good guy wrestler to be his proxy. And the winner of that match at WrestleMania would cause their billionaire to shave his head. So of course, the draw for that WrestleMania is the guy from The Apprentice going to shave his head on TV, which of course he was never going to do, right? Like the Vince McMahon was the bad guy. So obviously Vince McMahon's wrestler was going to lose, and then Vince would get his head shaved, and Trump was the good billionaire versus Vince the bad billionaire. And then a couple years later, they started doing this guest host thing on Monday Night Raw, and they did a storyline where Donald Trump buys WWE from Vince McMahon, which actually causes the stock to get really weird because they send out a press release so people aren't aware that it's just a story. So then they have to clarify, oh yeah, this isn't real, blah, 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 blah.
But 2009.
That was 2009. Yeah. And then Trump was the good billionaire again. And
It was 20 years.
Yeah, so he would give us episodes of Raw with no commercials because he spent his own money to give us this gift. Just like in the White House, Donald Trump doesn't take a single cent of his presidential salary. He gives that back to the government so that they can spend it on things we need. Right. Never mind that he gets $1 billion in bribes and jets and things like that. But the same story that we get from Trump, the politician, we got from Trump, the character.
It's so uncanny to watch. They're on YouTube. Some of the promos he cut. It's so uncanny. Like he's doing this.
It's gonna be the greatest thing ever.
He's
gonna be the greatest match
ever. McMahon is evil, awful, and is going to be defeated. And this is going to be the best thing in the world. And it's just indistinguishable from like what he started doing in 2015 to crowds.
Yeah.
That was okay. But that was the period of time where Trump more directly participated in wrestling, right? But how about his relationship with Vince McMahon? I mean, how old is it, and how did it develop exactly?
All right, John, you take that one.
Yeah. So I've heard this from a few people who Neal has said no people, but Josie Reisman talks about it, so this isn't just hearsay. It's in her book. So widely reported, there's two people in the world that Donald Trump, when he's on the phone with them, he sends everybody out of the room. One is Vladimir Putin, and the other is Vince McMahon. So there's theories about why these two people he does it, and people don't understand it. The relationship is personal, it's performative, it's financial, it's political. I think that McMahon is maybe the closest thing Trump has to an actual friend. For us, I mean, the financial stuff, we untangled a lot of this in our book, but some of it it's nobody has. I actually wrote some of these down. So Linda McMahon donated. So the financial stuff we can date back to the presidential run, and it's extreme. In 2016, Linda McMahon gave Vince's wife, who has a role in WWE, she gave him $7 million for his campaign. I don't know if you remember at the beginning of the campaign, in 2015, he was not accepting money. That was the biggest thing. He was self-financing his campaign. Then he did this thing about, what if an old lady sends me $1 check, I'm not going to send it back. A couple times he tried out, what if I do this, and people booed. Then he just stopped talking about it, and McMahon gives him like $7 million. She became in 2017 to 2019 the administrator of the Small Business Administration for the federal government. She stepped down and she led his super PAC in 2020, the largest pro-Trump super PAC. That's a weird thing that should be illegal with campaign finance laws, but isn't because of our Supreme Court. In 2007 and 2009, 10 years prior to that, the McMahons donated $5 million to Trump's family foundation. And for years, they gave nothing to their own family foundation. I don't know if you remember, Trump's family foundation was shut down by the courts because it was fraudulent.
Was that around the time McMahon was trying to run for Senate in Connecticut?
I think that was after that.
It was after. Okay, cool.
Okay, Google it though. That's so the family foundation is a very weird thing, and again, that's like 2007 and 2009. Why are they doing this? Nobody knows. She gave over $10 million to his campaign in 2024. She led the American First Policy Institute, served on Truth Social's board, and became co-chair of his transition team. Now she's the head of the Department of Education. There's some money stuff that we just couldn't figure out, and no one has, involving a large amount of money in the Gulf states. I think I just read that in the year and a half since Trump's been president, this time his fortune has more than tripled. Their family members getting tens and hundreds of millions of dollars through crypto schemes. There's a lot of Gulf money from that.
There's also Gulf money in the WWE as well. So that's common to both.
Yeah, because sports watching, I think, started with WWE.
Yes, it started with their shows from Riyadh because Prince, is it MLS, MBS? Mohammed bin Salman was trying to present himself as a westward-looking transformational figure in Saudi. So they started sponsoring huge Saudi shows and using the wrestling content as an ad to go to Riyadh.
So there's some overlap between, so I need to be very careful.
Yeah, and now they're doing that also with other sports, right? Like,
Yes.
for example, in 2023, Cristiano Ronaldo also went there to play soccer and is now in Al Nassr. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and on top of all that,
most American golfing at this point, like
and just to build on John's point real quick, if you look at the April 20th, 2026 issue of the New Yorker, they published something on Linda McMahon. It's how professional wrestling prepared Linda McMahon for Trump's cabinet. So we're not the only people talking about this. Like, major journalistic institutions are also talking about this.
But there is a weird thing, like when the Gulf states are maybe overpaying quite a bit for these wrestling matches.
Absolutely, they are.
The WWE, the people that won that largesse are putting money into.
I mean, they're overpaying everyone. They're also overpaying Cristiano Ronaldo. I mean, 200 million euros per year at his age is just ridiculous.
Also, I want to say, for a single show in Saudi Arabia, they make more than an American or European WrestleMania. Not that they've ever done a European WrestleMania. They've done European SummerSlams. But those shows are the most profitable, according to earnings reports from TKO.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they're going ahead with that, but they said that WrestleMania 43 was going to be in Saudi Arabia.
Yep. Right. I don't know if they're going ahead with that either because of the war in Iran, but that was certainly their intent. And before that, they did the greatest Royal Rumble in Saudi Arabia. Didn't Shane McMahon win that? That was kind of lame.
I think 20 years from now, people are going to figure out something in this Gulf money and wrestling and the Trump gambit.
Was that the one where? Was that the one where Titus O'Neil went below the ring?
Straight through? I believe so. So I actually stopped watching WWE when the Saudi money became too big of a thing. It was a combination of the Saudi money and Ronda Rousey losing to Becky Lynch, but not tapping out. I just, for some reason, that finish rubbed me the wrong way, and I was like, I'm done with WWE. And at that time, AEW was starting, so that's mostly what I watch now.
Okay, no, that's fair. But I mean, going back to Trump and Vince McMahon, I mean, when you look at them in terms of personality, business practices, and improper behavior, what are the main similarities that you see?
Yeah, can we start that with Neal? Then you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
We in the introduction of our book, we chronicle a bunch of these. There's just a shocking amount of parallels. They both inherited wealth. They both had incredibly difficult, problematic fathers. They're both amazing self-promoters. They both had a history of like just inexplicable business failures and rescue. And with McMahon, it's very hard to figure where the money came from. You know, where did he get the couple $1 million to buy his father and stuff like that? There are serious sexual misconduct allegations, and some Trump recently was convicted of with one of them. And then there's the stuff with McMahon with him finally stepping down. Things coming out that are
because of the Janelle Grant lawsuit. That's ongoing.
Yeah.
They both attack media. They're the only two people in American life who successfully attacked a judge and prosecutors. During McMahon's steroids trial, people thought he was crazy. All these lawyers, don't do this, dude. He would publicly go out and attack the judges and prosecutors. That was the macro for Trump doing the same. The phrase "you're fired" predates The Apprentice. It was used in WWE by McMahon. So there's this weird similarities between the two and their lives. They're both like really problematic with their own daughters. You know, he talks about Ivanka in sexual ways.
I forgot about that, actually. I forgot about that point.
His daughter.
I mean, they're problematic with women in general, right? Yes. I mean, if you go back and watch certain segments from the Attitude Era and from the ruthless aggression era, I mean, there are many weird things going on there with, for example, Trish Strathers and Lida and Ashley
like a dog.
And that whole thing with Ashley Massaro.
The greatest wrestlers in the history of wrestling. It was just so irritating because you'd want to watch them because they were so good on the microphone and they could actually wrestle. And then you're seeing them being mistreated by this promotion. But the sexual assault during the Attitude Era was in really problematic ways put into storylines. But one of them was like his daughter was in the storyline.
Yeah.
There was a moment where he pitched a storyline where Stephanie got pregnant, and it would be revealed he was the father, and Stephanie declined to do that storyline. But I believe,
and then he suggested, the her brother Shane McMahon, but she also declined.
Yeah, I mean, I can say as a fan, I wouldn't want to see that.
No, me neither. I mean, it's awful, but also I guess that back then I would have already been done with the McMahons on my TV. I mean, it was already too much. So
it lasted like 20 years.
I think one of the deepest connections. So there are all these sort of biographical connections and just weirdness connections, but and morally problematic connections. But one of the things Neal and I noticed is they both had a way to like weaponize their own lack of shame, and they can turn things that would defeat them into like superpowers. And we explore that in a lot of the books. I think we'll end up talking more about that in the future. But I remember the weird similarity, that they have in common, and we think that like Trump learned a lot of that from McMahon during the 20-year period when he was
right around the time the grab them by the you-know-what tape hit. I want to say that was right around the time Trump went to the debate with Clinton with all of Bill Clinton's sexual assault accusers to try to get to better or worse, that is what people talked about. They stopped talking about the tape. They started talking about the Clintons' problematic history with sexual assault. And all of a sudden, this devastating claim became a moot point because they were both suspect.
But somehow, like, this scandal becomes part of the story.
Yeah.
That keeps people watching. And that's, I think Trump, his social media persona, like he's winning if the eyeballs are on him, if he has the ratings, and that's the cardinal rule in wrestling is what gets butts in the seat. It's great if you're a bad guy, people want to come to hate you. You're getting butts in the seat. You're part of this story, and even doesn't hit you the way it does other politicians. If that's the case.
I mean, even sometimes Vince McMahon himself was willing to humiliate himself on TV just to get butts on seats, right?
I mean, we've got a whole chapter on that, right? Like where we talk about the buffoonery of the authoritarian figure.
I mean, we're going to get into that. And I guess that we've already talked here a little bit about the personal business and political ties between them. So I also don't want to give the entire book away. So, but let me ask you this. Do you think that the mannerisms and way of speaking that we see now, since 2015, Trump using in politics, do you think that he learned that from participating in wrestling and from Vince McMahon himself?
I think so. I mean, I think if you watch his appearances in WWE, you can see the seeds of his MAGA personality being sort of incorporated into the storylines or invented on TV in front of us, because he, the mythology of the good billionaire definitely gets its start with Trump as the person saving WWE for the fans from Vince McMahon. And, and that storyline was, it was fairly popular at the time. And same thing with the when the hair versus hair match with Umaga versus Bobby Lashley.
Yeah,
like the good billionaire ended up being a myth that had a lot of cultural cachet. And when he finally decided to turn his grievances against the Obama administration into a presidential run, he already had the blueprint for the character he would play.
Yeah, and then the storylines, like there's a corrupt villain, there's a sort of comic book hero, and that's promising to do something incredible that's never done before, like that. We saw that fictionally in WWE, and then it became the back row for the presidential campaigns.
And his timing was brilliant, right? Like I want to say in 2015, there was an article by a PhD candidate in Chicago, and I cannot locate the blog for the life of me because this was several computers ago, who wrote an entire like detailed series of blog posts about how he believed that the end of the neoliberal era was upon us, and that what would be coming would either be populism from the right or populism from the left. Yeah. And this guy just predicted what would happen in the Trump versus Clinton election, the Biden versus Trump election, and then eventually, like, all of it was spelled out in these blog posts, and I cannot find them. So if you are that scholar who wrote that,
the next election in England when Labour loses,
so we can quote you because you were dead on. But I mean, yeah, his timing was impeccable in making an outsider bid for the presidency. I think a lot of that comes from his understanding of professional wrestling and narrative.
Yeah. But I mean, on the topic of kayfabe, I mean, maybe actually we should explain for people who are not wrestling fans what kayfabe is, because they've been hearing this word kayfabe, and maybe some of them are questioning, oh, what the heck is kayfabe? So
there's a really contentious debate in professional wrestling studies about what kayfabe is and what kayfabe isn't, and we try to gesture toward that in the book. We end up being almost originalists with kayfabe in that we just refer to it as the code among people in wrestling to, in front of fans, pretend it's real. Basically,
to not reveal that the outcomes are predetermined. Yeah, because it is real. It's still real to me, damn it.
Yeah, you basically are preserving the audience's suspension of disbelief by not giving them visible proof that what they're watching is in some way not on the up and up. And throughout history, this was both enforced and transgressed regularly. You can find exposés of the professional wrestling industry being predetermined results back to the 19-teens. So it's like every generation discovers pro wrestling, and then every generation discovers that pro wrestling might not be on the up and up. But it just happens over and over and over again. But we believe kayfabe comes out of the carnivals. In particular, they would have the rigged strongman competitions where there'd be a strongman. He'd wrestle anyone from the crowd, and the first person that would come from the crowd would be a carnival employee, and he would almost beat this strongman. So then people would start giving money so they could beat the strongman, but the strongman was actually a shoot fighter and would choke them out and hurt them for real. Or if he got in trouble, he would bowl them over near a curtain, and someone behind the curtain would hit them with a bat, right? So that's the original kayfabe. We even think,
but as it became more, it was just much safer for everybody involved.
Yeah,
we did more and more of it in these carnivals where it's predetermined,
and the term. We actually think the term comes from carny. It might be a carnivalization or pig Latin form of fake.
We know the Snoop Dogg talk, like the shizzle stuff. That's from one.
Yeah. That's also related.
But kayfabe has phonetically in it fake. Mm-hmm. You through a pig Latin, you could go from fake to kayfabe. So that's that's a hypothesis. But
so we see kayfabe as largely the code that protects the audience's ability to suspend their disbelief. Mm-hmm. And you can find that throughout most of wrestling. If you listen to wrestlers and wrestler podcasts and books, they tend to take the same. That's why we gesture toward the debate in professional wrestling studies, but we end up sticking with something that's fairly recognizable to wrestling fans, just because for our purposes and what it describes, we think this is a really precise usage.
So can I just a lot of scholars that we learned from, they tend to extend it. So like, it's a contract between the audience and this may be Eero Lane's good, a contract between the audience and the performer to do this, that, the other. And we think that's absolutely right. Like, because the audience has to be complicit in their own suspension of disbelief. We describe that as like, not what kayfabe is, but like how kayfabe functions in the promotion. Yeah. So that's kind of a difference that doesn't make a difference, but by your notion of kayfabe, we're able to build on neokayfabe. The other thing is that, like, in some periods of history, kayfabe was ruthlessly invested. So
Mid-South, my dissertation, all about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in Mid-South, people get fired Like what John described in his origin story, where he saw the good guy and the bad guy in the same car. Bill Watts of Mid-South, the owner, he would fire any wrestler that broke kayfabe like that. He would not allow heels and baby faces to stay in the same hotels. So they would actually race after the show to get the nice hotel on the Louisiana circuit. If the baby faces got there first, they would get it. If the heels got there first, they would get it.
But if you lost a bar fight, he would fire you.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly the point I was going to say. In Mid-South, if you lost a bar fight, Bill Watts would fire you. He said, why am I paying you? I should be paying the guy who kicked your ass in the bar, because you've just exposed that my wrestlers are not tough in real life. So he's like, so the wrestlers would usually go to the bars together so that if something got out of hand, they could protect each other. But again, that's also, that ultimately is a way to protect kayfabe, because if I was in a bar and I watched some random dude beat up Dr. Death Steve Williams, that would have crushed me, because he's Dr. Death. He's supposed to be the best, but he's getting beat up by some random Louisiana country boy. Like that seems weird to me.
But the thing about the collaboration between the audiences, so by the other part of my origin story was here. My maternal grandfather, in college, I don't know, the 1930s, he wrestled under the name Babe Ackerman, and he was a heel in Texas in local circuits. So he had this thing where, like, at the very end of it, when he'd be bad, the good guy would slap him so hard, he would have a piece of chalk in his mouth, and he'd spit out the chalk. So it looked like he'd slapped a tooth out of his head. Would go crazy. But like, people would see him with all of his teeth the next week. And so, like, if you're not an audience, you have to be complicit in it. So it's a constant negotiation prior to the absolute breaking of kayfabe at the Montreal Screwjob, which we have a whole chapter about. But that leads to neo-kayfabe. So kayfabe is this. It's that code, narrowly defined, broadly defined. It's the negotiation to preserve fandom. Yeah, but that's prior to what we call postmodern fandom. Because remember, there's the Southern fan, the terminal critic, named after Ian Crystal, the fan, then the postmodern fan. But the fan has to suspend disbelief, and kayfabe, you have to maintain it just enough to allow the fan to do this.
And if you want to see some of the discourse that we gesture toward, you can actually look in the free journal Professional Wrestling Studies. I believe it's issue 2 or 3, where kayfabe was the central topic of the issue. So we went through that and sort of traced where it went. I thought it was really enlightening. And although we ended up endorsing a form of kayfabe that's much closer to what wrestlers talk about, that doesn't mean that the discourse didn't mightily inform what we were doing. You can also look at Herbert Blau's The Audience, which for philosophy fans they're less familiar with, but that's sort of one of the central books on suspension of disbelief published in recent history. So there's even our approach in this, we talk about this being an interdisciplinary book, but we are taking stuff from performance studies, professional wrestling studies, theater history, theater studies, and combining it with with analytic philosophy. Someone once told us in a presentation, like, oh, it seems like you guys are just taking wrestling and just doing analytic philosophy. And we're like, just is doing a lot of work in that sentence,
But look, let me ask you, because you said that in the book you talk about the Montreal Screwjob, which happened at Survivor Series 1997 in the match between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. But I mean, but sometimes when it comes to kayfabe being irreversibly broken in the history of wrestling, sometimes people mention the curtain call in 1996. I mean, what do you make of that?
The difference was that wasn't televised until later. Because it only happened in the New York market, all we saw at the time as wrestling fans, if you were watching back then, is all of a sudden Triple H starts losing matches. After being on a huge push, all of a sudden he's losing matches, and then this guy Steve Austin wins the King of the Ring, and then no one knows.
Actually, in hindsight, maybe Vince McMahon was grateful for that, because it was when he pushed Steve Austin.
Yeah.
So otherwise, it would have been Triple H, and we don't know at all what would have happened.
So they're still on its face after the curtain call in Montreal. And for people that don't know what that was, a number of wrestlers were leaving WWF. And
it was Scott Hall and Kevin Nash.
Right? Yeah, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Sean Waltman, and Paul Levesque, who's Triple H. And
Hogan hadn't left yet.
Hogan had left already, so they were going to join Hogan.
Yeah, Hogan was out WWF in '94.
Yeah.
Right.
So basically, what happened was Triple H and Shawn were staying. Shawn Michaels were staying, and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were leaving. So they came out to the ring and did a goodbye, where baby faces and heels in front of the New York audience said goodbye to each other. Now, that wasn't televised. So for the fans in Madison Square Garden, I think Madison Square Garden has a house capacity of a couple thousand. So ultimately, this was something that they could just pretend didn't happen. Whereas if you look at the Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart double cross, which is what the Montreal Screwjob is, that's the first time where, to understand the storylines of professional wrestling, you have to understand in storyline that professional wrestling is predetermined.
Right. But I mean, the Screwjob also ended up being one of the main points of inflection in terms of creating the Mr. McMahon character.
Absolutely. So all of a sudden, you've got suspension of disbelief is no longer being rigorously protected on television. And in fact, to make sense of that storyline, the only way it makes sense is if you know that the guy who was the announcer, Vince McMahon, actually owned the company, actually rigged a match, and there was a script. They didn't follow the script, and then the script was broken in front of everyone. And that is a vastly different ask of an audience than a traditional wrestling match. Do you want to?
It would be like being John Malkovich, where the John Malkovich character was both the character John Malkovich plays in a movie, like in Dangerous Liaisons, and John Malkovich. It's really postmodern. So that's the postmodern thing. They have to track two ontologies: the shoot ontology, which is the work ontology. The shoot ontology, the work ontology is the ontology of the fiction that's being told. The shoot ontology is the ontology of the real world with economic conditions underlying it. And so, like, the ring announcer says, "Ring the bell." And Shawn Michaels, who was scripted to lose the match, wins it. And then Bret Hart goes crazy and starts doing WCW. And what are they going to do?
How can you be a Southern fan after that, right? How can you believe when understanding the storyline presupposes that you know it's fake?
So our deepest sort of this sounds like I'm patting myself on the back by saying this, but I'll say insight in the book is that the important connection between Trump and McMahon is, one, the universal breaking of kayfabe, but two, we didn't know if this was going to destroy WWE.
Right.
What did they do to save the brand under the conditions of neokayfabe?
Yeah.
And what they did, and that was the most profitable, most butts in the seats period of wrestling ever, was the after breaking kayfabe and the things the promotion did. That's also the period where Trump is in, watching it and then getting himself involved in it. So it's what the promotion did to profit under the conditions of neo-kayfabe. Trump has come along and saw, how can you succeed as a politician under the conditions of late era neoliberalism? And where neither party does what they say they're going to do. Whatever you vote for, you're going to get austerity, right? Whoever you vote for. Britain is the worst case of this right now. And so this is fake. They're not doing what they say they're going to do. That lack of confidence that we had at the end of the Obama administration, because all the hopium got smoked or snorted or whatever you do with hopium. Trump sees it. It was a brilliant realization on his part. But what we've also realized is that the stuff Trump does and the McMahon does, you see that around autocrats around the world. This is stuff that just works. But it's just particularly focused in WWE because it's fictional universe interacting with the real world. And then Trump going for it.
So does that have anything to do with the fact that Trump doesn't seem to care that much about the truth? I mean, that basically he can go on tirades that are fact-free.
I mean, Vince did the same thing, right? Vince McMahon has said I'm not going to talk about this for long at all, but after Montreal, all of a sudden the WWE, when it switched to its PG era, was well, we're a business for kids. And it's if you look at the numbers, actually they're not. They're a business for people between 35 and 55 or so. And the highest percentage of children watching was actually during the Attitude Era, which was the era you don't want kids watching wrestling. But the entire rebranding of the company around appealing to PG audiences was based on a lie. And that lie is still regularly believed. And I know, John, you have a lot to say about this too. So I'll defer to you on the rest of it.
Let me just say, I thought that back in the Attitude Era, the biggest demographic was between 18 and 35, or did I get... Okay.
It was, but because it was a boom period, every demographic was watching. Okay. Raw did something like a 9.8 in the Nielsen's for an Undertaker versus Stone Cold match, which was the highest rating of any wrestling show ever. And so, of course, like the bigger demographics were adult, but because every demographic was up, the most in terms of raw numbers was the Attitude Era. And it was decidedly not for kids.
There's a political point here that's important. I want statistic, this, I may be misremembering it, but a plurality of viewers were the largest demographic percentage of viewers during the Attitude Era were in the United States were adult men who didn't have college degrees and who voted Democrat. Now, there probably are not that many adult men in the United States without college degrees that vote Democrat. And the promise that the storylines that WWE told is the same promise that Trump made in 2015. And so this ties to your question about bullshit that I'll get to, but it's a restoration of an economic social contract. So Stone Cold Steve Austin, he punches his boss in the face. He's always defeating the billionaires in the story. All the stories that we remember are around that with Steve Austin, but it's also
there were a lot of baby faces.
Sexual contract. With the amping up of sexism. And so a certain demographic that was being dislocated by neoliberalism and offshoring jobs, that's what they wanted to watch. And there are enough of them around that the story Trump told in 2015 was the same. Now there's an important academic, Harry Frankfurt, amazing philosopher, wrote a book called On Bullshit. And he defines bullshit as saying things where so a liar respects the truth. A hypocrite respects virtue. Hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue, because you'll only be a hypocrite because people expect you to be good. Part of Trump's perceived honesty is that he's not a hypocrite. He'll just say things that violate bourgeois morality. But the lens that people reading Frankfurt tried to read Trump through is that, like, oh, he's a bullshitter. He's saying things. He's not lying. A lying is I want to convince you of something false. A bullshitter is insensible to truth or falsity. I think that's too crude a reading of what Trump's doing. There is a Steve Bannon thing, flood the zone with bullshit. That's important. Like, you just get so much information out there, nobody can tell the truth from falsity anymore.
Right.
I don't think that's what Trump's doing. Trump is telling a good story that's going to put eyes on him. He learned that from WWE. He really did that well in The Apprentice with his sort of chaotic energy. And he weaponized that in politics, bringing back a lot of the tropes from WWE. So I think that you need this analysis of bullshit to say often the pragmatic point of what's being accomplished with the Speech Act isn't to convince somebody of something, it's doing something else. But just saying it's bullshit doesn't analyze what it's doing for him and why it works, because it's definitely doing something.
And there's no doubt that it does work. I'm not gonna talk for long on this, but I was a teenager when Stone Cold Steve Austin was beating up his boss. I was from a rural community in Louisiana. I did not like babyface or good guy pro wrestlers, but I loved Stone Cold Steve Austin, as did tons of adolescent male men, because all of us had power exerted over us in a way that felt unjust. And the hero figure of Steve Austin gave us a sense of the world as it should be. All right, go back, John.
What was Bill Clinton saying at the same time? Like, he would go to these communities where the factory had been offshored, right? And the Chinese took our jobs. No, they didn't. The Mexicans took our jobs. We sent them over there.
We gave them our jobs.
And he would tell them, like, you're going to be retrained for something. So you get a school for, like, HVAC. But, like, a small town with no industrial base doesn't need 100 HVAC engineers.
Right.
Or the worst was the creative class.
Oh, God.
Everyone's going to program, like, everyone's going to design web pages in HTML. That's not an economic base for a country. We've kept it going.
Don't need that many coders.
right? People buy oil with dollars so we could go consumerist, and this is part of the, we'll talk about neoliberalism more later, I hope. But at the same time, the jobs are going overseas, and you have a lot of like deaths of despair in the United States. The political class wasn't addressing it all. Like the Republicans, we just need to cut taxes more, and the government's the problem. Clinton, we're going to be this creative class, and it's the professional management class who were the bosses of the people of these towns. That boss class is being patted on the back by a party that represents them.
Yep.
During this time, the most popular entertainment is somebody who is punching the boss. And it's no accident. And again, it's the restoration of the previous 1950s sexual contract, which is very hierarchical and sexist, and really bad. Look at how many American women were institutionalized or, on serious antipsychotic drugs to treat their menopause. When I was a kid, you would drive in a rest stop, and you'd see older women, and their lower jaws would just be moving free like this. That's tardive dyskinesia, which is a side effect of antipsychotic drugs, which were wildly prescribed to miserable housewives during that sexual contract. But, some sort of longing for that, but plus the New Deal economic contract that was ripped away by both parties. And again, that's what Trump ran on. He didn't govern on it. The fact that he didn't govern on it and still got reelected the second time tells you that, like, the power to have politics be replaced by something where you're just punishing enemies is incredibly powerful. And people will vote against their own economic interest to at least get that. And that's what you've done when you've given up all hope.
And the second time Trump got elected, he was very adamant. He's like, no, Project 2025 is not what I'm going to do. Then immediately institutes it, right? That's why.
But he ran on retribution.
He did.
But he didn't run on the Bernie stuff the second time.
I think that's why his approval rating is so low right now, is because in the second time he ran, he delivered on the retribution, but he did not deliver on the other stuff that he promised.
Before we go on, let me just say that, back in the Attitude Era with the Mr. McMahon character and all that, because you were talking about Steve Austin punching him in the face. The most fun part was Steve Austin stunning Mr. McMahon, but Vince McMahon should have learned to sell the stunner better, because he was actually a very bad seller of the stunner. The best one was The Rock. And Mr. Vince McMahon was really, really bad at selling the stunner.
Well, Vince never wanted to be a character until he had to be a character. In the 80s, I heard an interview with Ted DiBiase talking about when he got pitched the $1 Million Man gimmick. And Pat Patterson, who was Vince's number one guy, told Ted, he's like, look, we can't tell you what the gimmick is until you sign, but it's so good Vince McMahon would lace up the boots to do it himself if he could. So Ted DiBiase just called his wife and said, I don't know what's about to happen, but it's about to be big, because I've been told we're only flying first class from here on out to preserve the illusion. So Vince knew he wasn't a good wrestler. Like he wanted to be a wrestler, but it wasn't until the Montreal Screwjob, which actually he did a test run of the McMahon character in Memphis about 3 years before he became Mr. McMahon with Jerry Lawler when he hired Lawler. He was the evil WWE owner, and apparently he had the time of his life doing it. So when it came time to make the jump, he knew he wouldn't be able to get it done in the ring, but he happened to be in the ring against some of the greatest professional wrestlers the American world had ever seen. So The Rock and Austin could carry him. But you're absolutely right. His stunner sucked. Like, you didn't watch Vince McMahon wrestle because it was going to be a good match. The draw was something very different.
By the way, you mentioned Pat Patterson. It just came to mind because of the Epstein files. Was that thing about the pedophile ring ever confirmed? Or
it depends on what you mean by confirmed. Did a court of law find him guilty? I don't believe it.
That poor kid killed himself, didn't he?
The kid ended up committing suicide.
Josie Reisman talks about this, and when they got him not to press charges,
they settled with the kid.
But the McMahons were like, the way they treated this kid is horrific.
It's monstrous.
Yeah.
And I want to say the only fallout that Pat Patterson had is they fired him for a year until the heat went down, then they brought him back. Because Pat Patterson was the guy who booked the Royal Rumble. That was his signature match because Patterson came out of the San Francisco circuit, and the big matches in San Francisco were, I believe that was under Roy Shire. I could be wrong about that, but this in California, where Patterson was from, the biggest event of the year was a giant battle royal.
So we should tell the listeners about the scandal. And I want to be careful because it's so sensitive, but correct me. So Pat Patterson, was he a booker? What was his job
He
title?
was Vince McMahon's basically number 2 guy. So he was, if you followed wrestling during the Attitude Era, he was Jim Ross before Jim Ross.
What were the Ring Boys doing during this period?
The Ring Boys were setting up the ring, and allegedly they would trade sexual favors for exposure. That is the allegation. It was never proven in a court of law, so I am not speaking to whether that actually happened. The court case was settled, but one of the people that they settled with ended up committing suicide, and it was widely rumored in the industry that this was what was going on, but it never went to a court of law. It was never established as a matter of facts. That's why I'm trying to be very precise about
I mean, we're going to come back to that later, but I mean, there were many performers that were heavily damaged by WWE. I mean, you have, for example, China, Ashley Massaro, who just recently, I don't know if
Ashley
it was
Massaro's case is tragic. Like what happened?
Yeah, but I mean, even China. I mean, I remember back in 2015, Vince Russo interviewing her for his YouTube channel because they were close friends. And I mean, she was a mess because she never got closure from that Triple H thing and the way she was treated by WWE and so on. And she very sadly ended up passing from an overdose in 2016. So, you know.
And I mean, it's something that, you know, people might not be aware of, but the wrestling business for a very long time, when people say wrestling is fake, what they mean is it's predetermined because there's never a safe way to take a bump. Like you can do it as safely as possible and distribute your weight across your body, but physically, doing wrestling is a huge physical toll. And back in the 80s and 90s, the house show schedule, those are untelevised shows, they would work 5 or 6, in some cases 5 days a week, taking these bumps, getting hurt.
Even 2 days a week is too much.
Yeah, and the only way your body could take that for a lot of people who weren't physically gifted is they would start doing steroids, not just for cosmetics, but because steroids are used to heal injuries quickly.
But then like Vince would only book the biggest people.
Yeah.
They would have to take way more steroids. And so many wrestlers, like Eddie Guerrero, we talk about this in the book, like, you know, they take human growth hormone and steroids, and then the heart just like,
and I'm working on, I've got an in-process paper I'm working on where you can explicitly connect steroid invention with the Cold War. Like it was viewed as a necessary thing to combat Russia synthesizing fake testosterone because the guy who invented anabolic steroids said, no, this is patriotism. We have to produce athletes that can rival these medicated Russians. So even then, like the use of steroids in the way McMahon would end up using it was the subtext the entire time. That
the Nazis had similar compounds because in the Wreck book we read, which is the guy making fun of Hitler, he died in a camp. But like one of it's very much like
they had super soldiers.
But like he comments on the German athletes in the Olympics, like being the paradigms of masculinity, but being impotent because of the chemicals they were given.
There was. Yeah, I know when it came time for the Russians to use it, there were people who were so steroided up to use the bathroom, they had to catheterize their genitals. And that's a fact. Like they were.
I mean, in the Rocky saga, what was the movie where he fights the Russian guy? Is
Rocky
it 3?
It's 2. Yeah, it's got to be 2 because 3 is
Ivan Drago.
Drago.
No, because I was just thinking that in that movie they even depict the Russian guy. I mean, them injecting things into his body, and then Rocky just doing a all natural kind of training.
It's all machines
or whatever.
Really fancy. But the McMahon like could have lost it all in a lawsuit against like his role in providing the wrestlers with steroids and the fact that they felt like they had to do it.
And McMahon believed he was going to lose. He actually approached Jerry Jarrett, who was the guy that co-ran Memphis for a long time. He brought in Jarrett to be his number 2 in case he went to federal prison. So that was the plan, was that if he went to federal prison, Jerry Jarrett, who'd run, and Memphis stylistically was the closest you could get to WWE without it being WWE. That was the guy that was going to take it over because McMahon was convinced he was going to jail.
Yeah, but so many wrestlers died in their 40s. It's
because of drug
abuse. But when you make them do that multiple times a week, like it's, you know, and then you make them have like these ridiculous bodybuilder bodies. It's just not a recipe for long life. It's amazing Hulk Hogan lived as long as he did. I mean, it's like
until they
he's
started
a real outlier. Like so many of them died in their 40s.
Until the crackdown on steroids that happened after the murder-suicide incident with Chris Benoit and a year after the death of Eddie Guerrero, I want to say something like more than 50 people who wrestled in the 80s and 90s died before the age of 50 just because of opiate abuse and steroid abuse. They had enlarged hearts and would frequently suffer heart attacks.
Yeah, we were watching some old WW or WrestleManias and like chalking off how many of them had died. It was so grim. But,
you could literally talk about which people are dead now from drug use.
But even nowadays, sometimes there are some questionable things because, for example, when Randy Orton came back at Survivor Series 2023, I mean, he was much bigger than he was before, and many people question. I mean, isn't he taking steroids? And the same with AJ Styles when he came back for his final run.
I believe, I do not know this. I believe both companies, AEW, All Elite Wrestling, and World Wrestling Entertainment, no longer test for steroids regularly. That is my belief based on the appearance of certain people and the way appearances change. I do not have proof of that, but I believe they no longer have a wellness policy governing that. Their wellness policy governs other things, but I believe they are no longer worried about anabolic steroid usage the way they were. And
there's new chemicals all the time, like
human growth hormones.
Our new. I got to make clear that any political things I say don't represent LSU, but like. Our new Chancellor Dalton, who'd been the provost of Alabama, he's a brilliant pharmacology guy. He designed a chemical that's really useful for people getting chemotherapy that lose muscle mass, and it prevents them from losing muscle mass. A bunch of Olympic athletes tested for this drug that he had designed years ago. Because you lose muscle mass when you take the semaglutides to lose weight. And so they think people are taking them now with the glutides, this pill that's really, really life-saving for cancer patients. People are taking it. And so the people in sports are really good at like tracking what the brilliant chemists come up with and thinking, can we do this? And then you get ahead of it. So it's possible you know way more about this than it's possible they're still doing it, but I mean, there are people there that know about the new chemicals that aren't testing for them if they're pushing for that body size.
One of the people I cite a lot in my work is the journalist Dave Meltzer, who's the longest tenured journalist covering pro wrestling. And he also was the earliest journalist that covered Ultimate Fighting. And one of the things he's been consistent on in combat sports is that it is their drug testing regime is an intelligence test for an athlete. Like you can beat any drug test if you are capable of understanding how you are being tested and what you are
sorry, though, like when they started the wellness policy after the Chris Benoit thing,
it was so good.
A few months passed, and then you got back, and people had smooth muscles. You didn't see any back knee. And they look like human beings, and they can move much better. The wrestling got better. So that's, I think like some steroid used to heal, like it's a medicine, right?
Right.
But you didn't have like McMahon really pushed people to be like just big and.
Big and immobile. It's why when people talk about the WWE style, it was a simpler style because the guys didn't move that well and they had to rely more on psychology and things like that in the matches. That's what my dissertation is on, by the way. It was on the use of style in pro wrestling and dance, and I did a lot of interdisciplinary work between philosophy of dance and wrestling. But I think when you talk about the way people are training now, if they are using steroids. I believe there are some people that are using them cosmetically, but I believe most people are using them so they can have more athletic matches and then recover. Because especially with no more house shows and wrestlers wrestling maybe 2 times a month in some companies, you can go a lot crazier in those big matches and then recover. That was how they did it in Japan, because All Japan and New Japan, the touring system in the 90s in Japan, when you had those amazing matches being done in All Japan Pro Wrestling with like Dr. Death Steve Williams, Mitsuharu Misawa, Toshiki Iwata, those guys, after every tour, they would go crazy in the last night of the tour, because that was usually Koralkin Hall or the Budokan or whatever big place. And then they had 3 weeks off where they rested. And that's why they could do the physical style they did, because they weren't doing the WWE style of 5 days a week wrestling every day.
Yeah, and I mean, we were talking about how the performers are basically mistreated by WWE. There was also, and I think it, at least to some extent, it also applied to the Chris Benoit case. There were also the CTE cases, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy cases. I mean, with the chair shots to the head that nowadays,
chair shots to the head. Who knew?
Nowadays they're banned, but I mean, you know what? There are some performers right now that should be a little bit more careful, because I don't know if you've been watching like EO Sky matches recently, but even
she's the best in the world.
Yeah,
but she's taking unnecessary risks with those dives.
No, those suicide dives. I mean, just recently in matches against Kairi Sane, Asuka, and so on, she fell on her neck 2 or 3 times.
I saw the clip of that.
I mean, that's insane.
But
I mean, even.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
The ties to our book is that, you know, a lot of this is the political history is late era neoliberalism, and McMahon benefited immensely from the changes in like anti-monopoly regulation.
Oh yeah,
the way you can lard up a company you buy with the debt and close it. You know, private equity type abuses. And this had this hurt wrestlers so bad because the old system, there was a cartel. And
basically,
I mean, Chicago libertarians took over the federal government for anti-monopoly regulations. Cartels were managed like monopolies. So the federal government enforced, if you worked with a promotion, they couldn't sign you to a unique contract. Because is it AWA, American Wrestling, was a cartel?
I believe it was the NWA in the consent agreement for antitrust laws in the late 1940s, early 1950s.
Yeah. So when McMahon, he's not part of that, and he's using the possibilities that allow you to make monopolies now. The fact that the cartel was under the older monopoly thing allowed McMahon to have a huge advantage, because he could go in, poach the best wrestlers, and sign them to a unique contract to where they couldn't wrestle with anyone else, but none of the members of the cartel could sign them to the contracts.
Right.
So it was a brilliant thing. He benefited from anti-monopoly law to establish an effective monopoly. WCW came out, they lost. Now AEW's up, so it's not quite a total monopoly. But in that time period, I forget, this may be Reisman's book, she tracks the amount of money wrestlers made in real dollars, the average wrestler. And under the cartel system,
they made a lot more, didn't they?
Wrestlers, like even jobbers, made a living wage and had enough to take care of their own health care and stuff. And it just radically goes down. And it's barely a living wage. You're doing something really dangerous, and you don't have health insurance. And it's one company that's like gaining all those profits and taking it for itself and giving a lot of money to Donald Trump along the way. But it was this neoliberal allowing of a big monopoly. He literally took advantage of the last vestiges of real anti-monopoly. You know, and to immiserate the employees. The employees are much worse off.
And Ricardo, I think I know the question you're about to ask. By the way, ask the question. I bet I know what it is.
Okay, I was going to ask, do they even have retirement plans?
No, because that is the exact question I thought you were going to ask. Because of the way that wrestling contracts work, wrestlers are technically considered independent contractors. However, independent contractors, real independent contractors in the United States under the law, they are not required to work exclusively for one company. So an independent contractor might not get employee benefits, but they have so many clients that they're able to get competitive rates and basically use the market to pay for themselves. Wrestlers are the opposite. They're signed to exclusive contracts unless you're in AEW, All Elite Wrestling, which has a promotional agreement like the cartel system with CMLL in Mexico, New Japan Pro Wrestling, Tokyo Joshi Pro, GCW, and I think PWG right now.
They own Ring of Honor now, right?
And they own Ring of Honor, but so those guys can go between any of the cartel promotions. But for the most part in WWE, you are signed to an exclusive contract. You can't even do film work without the express consent of the WWE. So they're deemed legally independent contractors, but they do not get retirement. They do not get health insurance. And they don't get any, they have to budget for themselves. Whereas I want to say I believe what industry insiders have said, like Sean Ross Sapp, Dave Meltzer, Mike Johnson, et cetera, is that ever since AEW has become the second largest and most successful wrestling promotion of all time, wrestler pay has gone way up because all of a sudden WWE has to bid competitively for people. And what we found is that a lot of people will take less money to go to WWE if they grew up watching wrestling and want a WrestleMania moment. And WWE factors in that nostalgia into their deals, whereas AEW typically pays more because they don't have that nostalgic connection. But we're getting the first generation of people now who've come up that want to be in AEW because when they were teenagers, they were watching AEW. Tekla, their women's champion, was like, she's a punk, she's really into punk rock. She's also a visual artist who has her own exhibitions and stuff in Florida. And she's like, oh yeah, since I was a teenager, I've wanted to be in AEW. So we're starting to see it change a little bit.
Wait a minute. How old is she? Because AEW started seven. Oh, because AEW started 7 years ago. So
yeah, I'm gonna double check that online real quick. But I believe she is mid-20s.
Well,
she's 33. She's 33. Okay, so I might be wrong. What she was watching allegedly was that, at least in interviews she said, so I'm wrong about her age. She's 33, but she did not have that emotional connection to WWE. She grew up in Austria watching local wrestling, European wrestling, and then Japanese wrestling.
Yeah.
I mean, economically, it's weird. I think that we don't quite have this figured out because, Cory Doctorow has this, we don't go into this in the book, he has this doctrine of enshittification about how, like, you can, if you have enough of a monopoly or a cartel, you can basically extract rents by treating the labor worse, making the product worse because people don't. That usually happens in the United States when the barriers of entries are too high.
Yep.
So there used to be anti-monopoly about radio stations. You can only own so many radio stations. When they took that off, Clear Channel did the WW thing and went and took over most of the radio stations. The barrier to entry to start a newspaper or radio station is so hard and so high that I can buy a newspaper for $20 million. And then 80% of the debt can be offloaded onto the thing I bought. And then nobody else is going to start a new newspaper. So I can make it like horrible, treat the labor. I could take the reporters, make the older reporters, I can't fire them, that's not legal, but I can make them go work in the advertising room until they quit. And I can cut all the coverage. This is what you got. Because we live in monopoly, nobody's enforcing anti-monopoly laws.
And shout out to philosopher Angela Black for pointing this out about radio in the 90s. She on social media talked about this, I think, before Dr. Rao's enshittification, because I remember I read it, some comment she wrote, I said, man, remember when radio used to be good?
But
and she basically
Dr. thinks that, like,
enshittification.
He thinks at some point the thing will die. I'm not convinced these things can not just go on for zombies forever, as long as you can keep the barrier to entry to a competitor gone through like the neoliberal playbook. But so it really is strange that if you look at other industries, that WCW was a thing, or that AEW. What we're saying is like this is circuses for the masses funded by billionaires.
Yeah.
So Ted Turner could start WCW. The barrier to entry wasn't too high.
And if you're watching WWE right now, the bread isn't even that good, right? We're getting our bread in circuses. And Ricardo and John and I were talking before this. It's a lot of WWE fans right now at the time of this interview, which is May 5th. Sorry to.
Oh, we're not getting that much bread. We're getting circuses.
Yeah, we're getting the circuses, but they're kind of crappy circuses, and the bread sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to pay too much for the tickets and so on. I mean, it's just insane. But and anyway, let me ask you about this, because I get a bit. It's a bit weird. I mean, at least for people who haven't read your book. But why is it that this trope of the strong man as buffoon works?
I think this is one of the hardest things, and we don't. So we have sort of 4 tropes that were in WWE that are characteristic of authoritarianism. And as academics, we're interested in truth and we want to understand what's going on. We think that these came in WWE. Trump got them through WWE, but they also characterize authoritarianism and the global rise of authoritarianism. It's just Trump was really good at it, and so was Vince McMahon. So one is cynicism, which we talked about, like neokayfabe.
Yeah.
This is all fake, but I'll tell you that I'm a con man, and you're in on the con with me, and we're going to take these other marks. Everyone can't do that. That's a pyramid scheme. It collapses. Right. But whatever, people, that's the reality. Then there's buffoonery,
sexism. We've already talked about.
Yeah. So on the buffoonery, this was the hardest one that we had a hard time understanding, and I'll hand it off to Neal in a second to talk about McMahon and Trump. But why would this be effective politically? And I think there are multiple reasons. And you see it. We look at Hitler was ridiculous, and people made fun of him in very much the same way that Stephen Colbert makes fun of Trump. So there's one aspect that we don't go to the book so much. Take like the British Epstein, Jimmy Savile, right? He weaponized his own weirdness, right? And so it had 2 things. One, he seemed less harmful. People could dismiss what he was doing. But 2, he could get away with a lot more. And he could test how much he could get away with. And so I think people who are exploitative tend to have an ability to. The weirdness is a really powerful superpower. And if you read about Savile, like he was the British Epstein, just as much. So. But also, there's a thing that strong men do. Who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Or your lying eyes? So when Trump first came in, he had Sean Spicer go out and say these were the biggest crowds forever, right? That's part of what authoritarians do. And so Trump, who's like very feminine, we can talk about that, curvy, makeup, cemented comb over, hugging flags, dancing to YMCA. He's very funny in the way he talks. Like this is ridiculous. There's a little bit of that. Like if that's your strong man, you're going to believe a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
No.
But also like the psychic connection with the strong man. If I in my life feel humiliated, if I am an unemployed steelworker and Bill Clinton comes to town and tells me I'm going to succeed because I'll get low interest loans to learn to program web pages, that's a horrific humiliation. You might as well just spit at me, right? And so I feel humiliated. So I look at Stephen Colbert making fun of Trump, and he's my avatar. And so I wish I had Neal and I thinking about this. We had a clear theory that tied all these things together. It's very effective. And so we see Trump or McMahon doing it when he reinvented himself as the evil boss. The psychic revenge on the boss is him being humiliated. And so Trump's kind of seeing this. So I don't know. Do you want to talk about it in WWE? Are there any questions?
We've already kind of talked about the WWE aspect. So a thing I've kind of just realized now in this conversation that I want to bring up is there's another important precursor to the buffoonery of Trump and McMahon that we haven't talked about, and that's Louisiana politics' own Edwin Edwards, which Ricardo...
Huey Long before
Huey Long before him. So Ricardo, I know you're from Portugal, so I'm going to keep this brief. In Louisiana, we had a beloved governor named Edwin Edwards who went to jail for, I believe, bribery and fraud. And he actually ran against a Republican candidate who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And the slogan for that election was "Vote for the crook, it's important." Because it was either a felon or an outright racist. And I think that part of Trump's appeal is that he's the honest liar. He's honest about the fact that he's going to lie to you. And we can trust him to lie. And because we can trust him in that way, he is therefore more trustworthy than most other politicians because at least he's honest about it.
Okay.
I don't know, John, do you think I'm crazy for finding that connection? It might be the case that I am. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure I could think of like Earl Long or Huey Long and stories.
And they both fit into that story too of the honest liar. And I wonder if Trump his appeals partly drawn on something that because in Louisiana politics is sports. Wayne Parent's book, he's a professor emeritus at LSU. He talks about it in his books analyzing Southern or Louisiana politics, is that we view it like a sports game. And what's more sporting than pro wrestling?
I mean, there's a famous thing where like Earl had promised a tax cut or something, and they came to him and say, well, what are we going to tell these people? He said this to him. He was like, oh, tell them I lied.
Yeah.
There's a great book by A.J. Liebling called The Earl of Louisiana about Earl Long. And they both were like both Longs and Edward Edwards, and Edward, like Edwards in that election, he would compare himself to Jesus. He would say at the end of that, tell them that one arose from among you, and use all this biblical language. The press gave him, and in front of the press club of Louisiana, he stood up on a chair. He got a bottle of ketchup. He put it on his palms, and he rubbed it on his side. And he did this. And he still got elected in Roman Catholic Louisiana.
Yeah,
right.
It's wild.
There's this. I don't know. Like Neal and I have like a soft spot for the Longs and. Yeah, I know. Like your uncle, your dad, your grandfather worked with Edward.
Yeah, my grandpa was one of the local bosses of the Long Democratic Party. My grandpa had a second grade education, was a field hand, but because of Long's unionism and stuff like that, Papa got elected. So when Papa died, the Long family sent flowers. Edwin Edwards sent flowers. So apparently they held me when I was a baby at some point.
Neal's from Charenton, Louisiana.
Yeah,
I'm the same name as the insane asylum where the Marquis de Sade was.
Yeah, I'm from a rural community called Charenton, which was named after the insane asylum where the Marquis de Sade was imprisoned after the French Revolution. Yeah. But like that.
Well, I mean, I will have to look up all of that later. I mean, no. I was just worried because we have like 30 more minutes, and we've been talking a lot, and I want to cover at least 3 more topics, and then we also have to schedule our next interview just to talk about
watch a pay-per-view event or something, like watch an AEW pay-per-view event and then just have a talk about it, because I think a lot of the stuff we talk about in the background of the book, we could really show people how it's instantiated in current wrestling, even though it's not WWE. I just don't want to watch WWE.
I want a grand unified theory of wrestle crap, so that's
well, maybe we will have to make you go through the pain of watching WWE pay-per-view. Yeah, because I mean, we're talking about WWE here. We have to keep it. I mean, within the topic. So, I mean, let me ask you, because there's a fourth trope that you identify in your book having to do with authoritarian regimes and pro wrestling, or WWE more specifically, that has to do with conspiracy theory. So what role do they play in politics and in Donald Trump's politics specifically?
What's key to conspiracy theory is that, look, there are true conspiracies, like Nixon,
probably the Epstein stuff
with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the Iran hostages under Reagan. These were conspiracies. That's not a conspiracy theory. A conspiracy theory explains a lot of stuff that bothers you in terms of a tiny cabal of actors, and the sort of Marxist position is to look at the structural conditions in the economics and politics that lead to bad things. The sort of like conspiracy theorist is to look at one person. Now, the hard thing, and Neal and I argued about this a lot in the book, like how much power does one person have? Like, would Amazon still have existed without Bezos and there'd just be another Bezos? Probably. Like a lot led towards monopolization politically in the United States. So a conspiracy is like this idea. It's the great man theory of history on steroids, right? And there's a reason for that we go into with probability theory, which what I won't go on to here because it gets a little too. I'm more interested in what we might do about this, which gets us about the Klein Duhem problem. We can talk about it in our book.
Yeah.
So it's some of the book, like Will Summers' book on QAnon conspiracy theory. This stuff is nuts. What these people believe, it makes no sense. Like there's hundreds of thousands of mole children.
Scrutiny.
There's mole children living underground who are tortured and harvested for the adrenochrome that allows people to live forever, and
they're clones.
John Kennedy Jr. is going to come back on a certain day, and all the Democrats are going to be be killed, and there are all these predictions that are supposedly Q drops or someone with a Q intelligence clearance. They never come to pass, and a lot of people don't give them up. And when people follow these conspiracies, especially during COVID, they would like a cult push away a lot of their friends and the normal people of their life. So there's a lot going on here. Fox News is a problem because reliably people have less true beliefs that are if you believe that that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, people who watch Fox News believe that. If you believe that human beings don't cause global warming, Fox News believe that. If you believe that Biden stole the election, Fox News. So that's part of it. We're in, starting with lies about global warming and things like this, people became, programmed to be, to believe falsehoods. But how do you get to this theory that there's a small cabal of insiders, usually Jewish, in the conspiracy theory? Anti-Semitism will crop up in any ideology.
Oh yeah.
And who are controlling everything, and so that's what a conspiracy theory is. Now, one of the things, this is the most important first thing that I forget. I just named the author. I named him earlier who wrote this book on Will Summers, great journalist.
Will Summers,
The people he interviewed in QAnon, the whole thing is around the cabal to abuse and torture children, right? Now, the weird thing is that actually existed with Jimmy Savile. That actually existed with Jeff Epstein. Most of them weren't concerned about that. It's this weird thing with a pizza restaurant in the basement that doesn't exist.
They weren't concerned, and they're still not concerned. At least some of them.
It's split now with Epstein. They've lost some of the people because Epstein just was from central casting for a conspiracy. But what Will Sommer realizes is that almost without fail, the women he talked to that were pulled in conspiracy theories and the men, one of two things happened. And they're Americans. They were crushed by medical debt because we don't have socialized medicine in the United States. And if you get cancer and your insurance company screws you over, like our dear friend Helen DeCruz, who died and
amazing
medicated recently, some of these people that aren't covered or they don't have insurance coverage or they get debt, and it's very hard to discharge that debt under bankruptcy. Thank you, Joe Biden, because he made bankruptcy harder to get with student loan debt. So that's one thing. The other thing was they were victims of sexual abuse as children. But the sexual abuse was always, there was never a shadowy cabal. It was almost in every case either a church or family friends or family members. That's a very hard thing to face.
Yeah.
If your husband or your boyfriend. So this is horrific, but about 1 in 20 men sexually assault women. The average number of women they assault are 5 women, right? That's a plurality of voters right there. That could shift an election. Yeah. But also the people in their lives that have to live with them and convince themselves these are good people. There's tremendous cognitive dissonance dealing with that kind of trauma when you're stuck in a society where the church is doing this, or you're homeschooled, and the homeschooling is to keep anyone adult from seeing the abuse that you're suffering.
Yeah.
Lots of people escape it, but lots of people don't. They stay in those societies. And what Will Sommer found is the ubiquity of badly handled sexual abuse in the United States, and the ubiquity of medical debt. The way these were the people who are the biggest victims of conspiracy theories that tells you a made-up story that explains your suffering because you can't face the real cause of it. And the real causes that are structural. Neoliberalism, privatizing medicine. So conspiracies serve to some extent of a ruling class to keep people from facing their own basis. Now, how does this tie to WWE? The storylines under the attitude, we go into a long one we won't go into here, where it's like a year at least, where you finally end up that like it's McMahon takes off the list and he's been behind all the evil all the time.
Yeah. The higher power.
The higher power storyline. So
that storyline was in 1999.
99. It was, yeah. It was
but Trump was constantly, the people around Trump, they're constantly, it's very interesting because Marjorie Taylor Greene was probably the most, cheese-brained on QAnon person in the American life. She has, to her immense credit, she has turned on Trump over the Epstein cover-up.
Yeah.
So, don't, a lot of Dems like, we can't talk to her, whatever. Like, come on, have some respect. That was immensely difficult for her. She had to turn away from tons of people in her life to do this. So, but Trump was really skilled, and the people around him at not going all in for the QAnon, but saying things that were coded to keep them along. Then it would go to the Q drops. People around him were really aware of this and doing this. And so part of that support was conspiracism. He wasn't as explicit. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if Salazar or Franco or Hitler, these kinds of dictators. I should know Salazar more than we're talking about Portuguese.
Right.
And I'm really interested with you if the living memory of that maybe inoculates the Portuguese against some of these things, or the Spanish or the Germans. Part of the problem is, though, there's a theory that every 70 years society gets stupid because nobody remembers the previous trauma. Nobody was alive for the previous trauma. And that's why you get really dumb foreign policy 70 years after a bad war. But Hitler, the anti-Semitism, you're blaming the Jews. It's a small cabal. And so, anyway, this seems to be a way. I'll try to keep this quick, but when it's harder to extract profits, what do? If you're an empire, you do Foucault's pendulum. You extract the profits from your own people, and they don't get the wage from empire anymore. That's what neoliberalism was. All the stuff we did after World War II coming home. That's one theory of neoliberalism. And so, but when people are getting poorer, the liberals have a choice. Because liberals are committed to two things historically. One, absolute negative liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of thought. But also, they're committed to continued capital accumulation, accumulation of profits. Yeah. When those two things fight each other, so profits for social stabilities, liberals will make a deal with the left. That's what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did in the United States with Wallace as his vice president. And we avoided fascism because the liberals and the left worked together. It was different in Austria. Dollfuss, I forget his name, the Austrian, president, prime minister, he put artillery on 2 blocks of Vienna to defeat the left, right? And then the Nazis come and kill him. And that's a mistake liberals always make, that when profits go down, they've got a choice between continued profit accumulation or commitment to negative liberties. You can't have negative liberties without positive liberties. There's great philosophers on this critiquing libertarianism, but they will give up positive rights. So Roosevelt, the 4 freedoms, one of those was freedom from want, right? And there's pictures of this. Look up Roosevelt's 4 freedoms. But freedom from want was smart. He was a liberal, but he redefined a positive liberty, a positive right, as a negative right. It's freedom from want. So liberals had to support the left under Roosevelt. And we had a New Deal that kept us from going fascist or communist. Churchill actually did some similar things, weirdly, in England, the empire. So as a liberal, you go with you give up your commitment to negative liberties, and then you support fascists to keep extracting profits. And how do you do that? How do you convince people to do that? Conspiracism is part of, once it's become fascist, the communists did it too. The doctor's plot and things like this. Conspiracism is a really effective way to misdirect people, to give them the psychic wage of apartheid. You may be poor, but somebody's poorer than you, and by our hierarchical system, you're higher than them. That's so. Conspiracism has this gross history in promoting hierarchy and fascism, and that just is the history. And QAnon is part of that history, and it's part of Trump coming to power. And what's amazing is McMahon saw this in terms of entertainment. Trump saw politics as entertainment. where the psychic payoff is punishing those you hate. But what McMahon did with conspiracism, we think that trained Trump to like be smart about weaponizing QAnon for his own voting base.
Yeah.
A good thing, though, is it does reveal a possibility going forward of counter narratives. Like if we can find positive counter narratives, I think that's what FDR did that you just talked about. And I think that the resistance right now in American politics from centrist and establishment liberals is really kind of terrifying. We actually just had our first centrist attempted assassin at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I think one of the dangers of the current path that the
third, all three of them who tried to kill none of them leftists. It's only liberals and centrists that are trying to assassinate.
Yeah, if the only
but if you listen to people on the news and on YouTube commenting on that from the right, they all say, "Oh, it was the radical left."
These people wrote. They're cheese brain liberals. I mean,
it's the if you're a liberal and you reject the left-wing analysis of structural or systemic inequality, all you have left is Orange Man bad. And if Orange Man is bad, that's the only thing you have to do is they would think, I'm not endorsing this, the only thing that an Orange Man bad believer really believes has to happen is you beat the bad people. If you get rid of the bad people, everything will be good. Leftists understand that, that is not the case. But it scares me that, if this retrenchment of centrism and the sort of neoliberal consultant class is, I worry that we're going to keep seeing political violence because they do not have a narrative that explains things for why things are the way they are.
Or a much more competent Trump at doing the autocracy. Like Starmer in England it's grotesque. Like the first thing they ran saying they were going to be left and it was going to be better. The first thing they do is fire a bunch of MPs who are trying to vote. The Conservatives have a policy: you only got social welfare benefits in Britain for your first two kids. So some Labour MPs thought like we're not going to do like Tony Blair stuff. Let's do this. They fired those MPs. Right, and then they raised heating bills. Like nobody voted for talk
about not reading the room, right?
That's what they did. And then now they're trying to what are they doing? They're trying to co-opt the right on cultural narratives, right? It's so this is what liberals that have no connection or who was the Epstein guy that was the he was the British ambassador to the United States under Starmer.
Oh, that guy. Yeah. I don't remember his name, but
anyway, he was like their Rahm Emanuel, the enforcer. I think the end of thick of it was based on him.
Yes, I believe it was.
Doctor Who guy who's and Farage has a really good chance of winning now. I don't think this is going to happen in the United States, but that is the script. We want to be, I think a Kamala presidency would have been a Starmer presidency.
Oh yeah,
and something even more terrifying. Something look at this.
I've lost a lot of liberal friends because they're irate that I don't.
Oh, they hate you on YouTube, on Facebook, Neal. They hate you so much.
Oh yeah, on they hate that I don't blame Republicans for what's going on because they're doing what they were elected to do. I don't like it. I think it's evil, but I'm very angry at the people that are supposed to be opposing this who do not have a countervailing narrative that can meet the moment we are in.
So let's talk philosophically about a narrative. What a narrative is, because the consulting class is always about framing rhetoric, and this is the George Lakoff, who's an impressive linguist. His theory of metaphor is great. But you just need a better story, and there is a big fight in the DNC, the Democratic Party, about this right now. So I think it could go either way. But you cannot, if you have a family member who watches a lot of Fox News, that you cannot convince them.
Right.
You can't say no, that's factually false, and I'll show you why that's factually false. You can't do that. You do a QAnon person. It doesn't work. The best thing you can do is sort of listen to them. Sometimes they find out that you don't. There's an assumption that of a dualism that you must love Biden because you're. Sometimes they'll listen to you when you critique the left too, or the liberals too, but we tie this to a problem in analytic philosophy, just like our account of the fans and the match and the ontology of wrestling comes out of analytic philosophy. In analytic philosophy and epistemology, there's a thing called the Quine-Duhem problem. And this is simply, in science itself, the simplified theory is we test the hypothesis, and then the experiment tells us whether it's true or false. Well, that almost never happens because you can't just test you can't test like a scientific law equals MC squared. You have to have a bunch of other physical theory explaining how the experiment works, and a bunch of auxiliary hypotheses. You need a bunch of simplifying assumptions to make the math doable. You have to cancel infinities and things like that. You have to see what the tolerance is for vagueness, and then you have to assume the experiment blocked out the other forces. But any one of those hundreds of thousands of things could have gone wrong besides the thing you're actually testing. So that's why science is falsifiable, but it's hard. But you only falsify a bunch of assumptions. It's never really clear what those assumptions are because experimental work isn't the same thing as a logic program, right? So the Quine-Duan process, if you want to hold on to something bad enough, you can always just say something else went wrong and keep holding that. And what Neal and I realized is that conspiracy theorists do that. We realized talking to our own family members who we love, who tell us oh, all these cops are touching fentanyl and dying, and we'll try to explain the chemistry. We have colleagues who work with these things, in the vet school. You can't. So how do you respond to the Quine-Duan problem? And what we argue and what we look at with memorial stories in wrestling that actually did change the material conditions for the wrestlers for the better. A better story isn't the story that's keeps everything you wanted and has better rhetoric. A better story needs to be more true. You have to make sense of a story being more or less true than the other. You can do that philosophically. It should be beautiful. And it should be good. It should have an explanation of what's went wrong that's plausible and true, and a horizon of something that's better. The Democrats of the United States, I shouldn't say this as an academic. I mean, I'm an academic. I study this stuff. The Democratic Party has no picture of the future in this country.
None.
The Labour in England has no picture. Carney in Canada has no picture of the future. He's talking about building data centers and AI. What are you doing? There's no model of the future. It's that we're going to save you from the orange bad man. That's not going to work. We're going to have to collaborate with some consultants and tell us how to do that. So
what little they talk about is wildly unpopular.
So there's structural reasons they're doing this. There's interested reasons. It's a whole class. I don't know. But the way to address the Quine-Duan party, you have to have a better theory. So why did special relativity replace Newtonian mechanics? Special relativity got everything Newtonian mechanics got right, but it also gets right the orbit of Mercury and the things that it got wrong. That's complicated in science. It has to, special relativity reduces in a limit of I forget that you can do this a couple of to infinity, and then if you reduce those to infinity, you get Newtonian mechanics. There's formal things. This isn't rigorous and formal like that because politics isn't a theory that can be represented mathematically. But we think the lesson holds. You need to have a story that is true, good, and beautiful. And we think in wrestling that did happen in a way that Vince didn't want to happen, but he had to let it happen after the death of, there were three deaths. Neal saw one of them on my pay-per-view, Owen Hart's, Eddie Guerrero's, and then Chris Benoit, which initially was a home invasion where they all killed, and they realized it was a murder-suicide that lasted over 6 days. Just monstrous.
In the middle of the tribute show to Chris Benoit, where they were airing his matches, they figure out that Chris Benoit was the murderer. You can see the exact moment on that show when they figure it out. And it's when William Regal is talking, and all of a sudden he's the first talking head that is serious, somber, and sad. Where the others were talking about how much he meant to him. All of a sudden Regal is on TV talking about the child, the children, the wife, and he barely mentions his friend. And it's
they really made a mess of that also because not only because of how they dealt with the tragedy itself, but also even if you only care about the wrestling, they even completely ruined that storyline where Vince McMahon apparently died and then he was back on Monday Night Raw.
Actually called him to find out if he was really dead, by the way.
No, I know that.
But they scared. It was a little bit of a misperception though, because the use of steroids, human growth hormones, and drugs of Benoit But his finisher was like jumping off the rope and then headbutting somebody on the ground.
Diving swan dive headbutt was what they called
it.
it.
The brain results from his autopsy, like his brain was really shrunk in like areas you need.
I mean, that was probably also the result of CTE,
Absolutely.
as I was referring to earlier. So
yes, absolutely.
I think certainly if we look at that, but
he had the brain of a 73-year-old.
They did have the health policy with steroids, and like within a month, the bodies changed. They were smooth. There was no the back knee, the zits and pimples in the back, and the wrestling got better because they could move their bodies more.
Yeah.
But also they're going back on this a little bit. They banned some of the head injuries, like getting hit on the head with the head with the chair. So they were aware it was CTE. So, but part of it was like Guerrero's death. Guerrero had went to rehab and come back and got clean.
He was the success story of wrestling. He was the
it was when he came back was when he had that amazing feud with Brock Lesnar, right?
He had the ladder match with Rob Van Dam. That was one of the best matches in WWE history.
Fantastic. But then when he died, like the salvation story that we were telling about Guerrero, you couldn't tell it anymore because it still killed him. His heart was too big from the human growth hormone.
He died of a broken heart.
Yeah. But they sort of like didn't do much after that. But then during Guerrero's, so in the memorial shows, everyone breaks kayfabe. Rey Mysterio takes his mask off. He didn't show his face. And but the most compelling performance of authenticity was Chris Benoit. And Neal and I watched it in his apartment. And we had tears in our eyes because Benoit just started weeping uncontrollably.
He couldn't speak. It was like ancient Greek, like keening. Horrifying.
Benoit was a great wrestler too. And so like somehow that like diverted it or did whatever. And Benoit had been his road partner. They slept in the same hotel rooms. And then Benoit does this, and then like the whole thing is broken. And what we got out of the memorial show from Guerrero was broken. At that point, like they could not tell a better story because what neokayfabe does is you take things from the real world, and you put them inconsistently put them in the story and keep going
fictionalize
with the story.
them.
But they couldn't. So you use that to make the story better. Use the real to make the story better. But sometimes the story puts normative constraint to make the real world better.
Yeah.
The fireside chats of FDR did that in the United States, for example. So the story that WWE, the only story they could tell at that point to where you could say like Eddie's death was for something and Benoit's not going to happen again, or it won't be their fault if it happens again, was finally for the first time. Again, Vince McMahon almost went to federal prison for this, for basically forcing the wrestler to take steroids, finally having a health policy where the wrestlers won't rest if they test them for steroids. And then in doing that, they have to make the work rate less, so you're not just killing them with like constant injuries. And so that for us, our analysis of Klein Duham and stories and narrative, we think from wrestling we can get a little bit of hope for the political moment of don't repeat what Starmer and Labor's doing.
Right.
That's going to lead to Farage, I forget the fascist guy. Farage in England.
Farage, I think.
There are other possibilities. And if we're going to follow something in wrestling, let's follow that. And I think Memorial has a
we do end with probably the greatest single episode of television in wrestling ever, which was the Brody Lee tribute that AEW did. Which like if you want to talk about the beautiful, the true, and the good, basically for people that don't know, a wrestler died unexpectedly of lung complications, and
was that during COVID?
This was during COVID, but it was not from COVID. It was, but there's so much about COVID we don't understand.
The long stuff hit. Everybody was.
Regardless, they were going to do the tribute show, and Tony Khan, the owner of AEW, is a former board poster. I posted on the same boards as him in the 2000s and 90s. So I that's my connection to the owner of a wrestling company. And he did an interview with Dave Meltzer before the show. He said, "Look, at about 3 a.m, all of a sudden, I just couldn't handle it." And he ripped up the show he wrote and decided he was going to write a wrestling show to make Brody Lee's son, Brody Lee Jr., smile. And that was the content of the show. It was a celebration of this kid's dad, with all the people that were allied with his dad being baby faces for the night, being the good guys. And it was all done to give this kid closure, for his dad's death, and they paid the money.
It'd be so easy to, it's a miracle.
Never go away.
So they can that's horrible. They're monetizing the kid. It's not that when you watch it. It's
not bad when you watch it. And in fact, they spend, like Tony Khan says on there, he said, I spent the money needed so that if someone watches this show on streaming in 90 years, they will hear the correct music and see the correct video, because it's important to us that this memorial work. And, you can't watch it without crying. I
think it's also, it served as a public affirmation of the different social contract that AEW has
with its fans.
So when you watch that, you contrast it to the memorial shows and the fakery of a lot of the WWE memorial shows, but you also you're contrasting the material conditions of the wrestlers with the WWE wrestlers. And I don't know if we said this when Owen Hart fell to his death. Neil saw that live on.
Yeah, I was watching that pay-per-view. It was the day after I graduated from high school. Owen Hart was my favorite wrestler in my adolescence, him and Shawn Michaels. I liked the heels, and I watched my favorite wrestler die the day after I graduated from high school.
Oh, so you watched Over the Edge 1999 live?
It was my first pay-per-view that I watched in 2 years, because I went to boarding school, so I didn't have the ability to watch pay-per-view there because we weren't allowed to have cable and TVs. So it was the day after I graduated high school. I was like, I'm bored, I'll watch this thing. And I saw Owen Hart die. All of my friends at the time, because we were all teenagers, we all thought it was very symbolic that my childhood hero died the day I graduated from high school. So shout out to my friends.
I forget that Harold Bloom talks about the anxiety of influence. So every artist is sort of like wrestling with their influences. And I think like memorial shows, like everyone crafting a memorial show has seen all the other memorial shows.
Oh yeah, like I remember from the Owen Hart show, Mark Henry wrote a poem, and it was not what a literature professor would consider a good poem, but it was utterly sincere. And you can't listen to this man recite this poem he wrote about his dead friend without I couldn't.
But that's still WWE monetizing.
Yes, it is
horribleness. They monetize the death of their own wrestler.
I mean the fact that
more after Chris Benoit, it just broke, and so they had to change something.
The fact that back then Vince McMahon decided that the show should go on. I mean, it was just
indefensible now.
JR was almost in tears. Jerry Lawler was almost in tears. Jeff Jarrett, Deborah,
crying in a match while this happened, utterly crying in a match. Hey, is that Coco?
Coco.
Oh, okay. So look, let me just ask you, because I think that we've run out of time here, right? So
I do it is finals week at Grambling, so I do have to quickly eat before students come in and start begging for better grades.
Okay. So look, guys, let's wrap up the conversation here. We definitely have to schedule another one at least. So let me just say that the book is again Kayfabe Nation, Professional Wrestling, Donald Trump, and the New Cynicism, and I will of course leave a link to it in the description of the interview.
You can download it for free.
No, I will leave that link.
Please, if you're at all interested, download it for free. It's a free ebook. You only have to pay if you want a print copy.
Yeah. Okay. So look, Dr. Hebert and Dr. Cogburn, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a fantastic conversation. I really loved it. It's been so much fun. And look, we have to schedule a conversation just to talk freely about wrestling.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
And if you ever need to talk about philosophy and Dungeons and Dragons, John and I have published on that as well. And I'm a D&D streamer, so people, you ever want to have a conversation about tabletop role-playing games? We might have to revisit that topic too.
But let's do the wrestling. We got
to do wrestling. Yes, we got to do wrestling.
The art of wrestling
for sure. Okay, so thank you so much again.
Absolutely,
it was great meeting you. Thank you. It was awesome.
Bye.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, learning and development done differently. Check their website at enlights.com, and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters. Per Ergo Larsen, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sunda, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf Alex, Adam Kessel, Matthew Whittingford, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetri, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Michael Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Ford, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Cossen, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Labyrinth, João Linhares, Stantantia, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardus France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Romain Roach, Diego Londonho Correia, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavlo Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Allman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeager, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Loaki, Georgios Theophanes, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry Dealey Jr., Old Erringbon, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismael Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Dios Necht. A special thanks to my producers, Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Ugnik, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, John Carlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.